You were chosen as a quote, in huge air quotes, plus size model. You were the only one for that season. How the hell did
I
they
know.
consider her plus size?
They told me that I would be the plus size model. I think that second day, they said, "Oh, we need to see your confidence. We want you to show off that curvy body. What does it mean to you to represent the plus size girls? What does it mean to you to be the plus size contestant?" And I had absolutely no answer. I had no frame of reference for it because I didn't shop at plus size stores. I wasn't a plus size person, and I didn't know enough about the industry to understand the difference between a plus size person and a plus size model. And I think if I had, I would have been very frustrated, but that's a whole other conversation. But the fact remains still to this day that a plus size person and a plus size model are not the same thing. And so I knew that all the other girls that were there had probably been told their whole life that they should model. And I had
Hmm.
not. That wasn't something that people said to me. It wasn't something that I thought. I was very thin because I'm also 5'11". Like that's a
Oh my
very
gosh.
thin frame.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what they were looking for. I didn't know to be like, absolutely, curvy girls rock and real women have curves. I didn't have those like catchphrases that sort of entered the zeitgeist and became a part of our awareness, like around that time or a little later. And so I just was sort of going off of like the J.C. Penney catalogs and Newport News catalogs that my mom got. I knew that they had a plus size section, and I was like, "Is that me?"
So good.
Right?
I
Such a
remember
thing.
those.
Yeah. And I stumbled through and I tried to be body positive, but I just didn't have the language, and I just also did not feel positively about my own body. So I certainly didn't know how to make anyone else feel good about theirs. I and I did make it through, but I just remember being like, man, I'm not saying what they want to hear right now when they asked me about it. And that was my first introduction. And I didn't really think anything of it again until like I landed to shoot the first episode, and I was talking to some girls in the airport in Puerto Rico when we landed to shoot the first episode, and I realized that like the plus size thing was going to be my thing and my angle. And I felt this pit in my stomach when I realized that I was going to have to talk about my body and my weight. I didn't understand at the time that I had a burgeoning eating disorder, and when you have an eating disorder, your weight is the thing that you think about the most and that you talk about the least.
Hmm.
It's very much like if I would have kept it hidden under a rock, and I would never have talked about my body or my weight. And so I was sort of realizing like, oh no, someone's going to lift up this rock, and we're going to have to talk about it.
So walk us through what it was like in that moment, the elimination day.
So the elimination day was like any elimination day, one of the longest shoot days that we had. They would often go from like 5 a.m. until about midnight or later.
Oh my
They were
gosh, why
very
would it
long
take
days.
so long?
Well, we would get, I say 5 a.m. We would often have to leave by like 7:30 or 8. And for however many girls there are to shower and get ready, it takes a long time. So we would get up, very early and get ready, go to set. And a lot of times we would just have to sit there on ice for a few hours. It was the most on ice we ever had to do, in a day. And so it was a lot of sitting quietly. And, the elimination before, I think I had been convinced I was going home, or maybe two before. I'd been totally convinced I was going home. And then I didn't. And so I was like, all right, I'm here. I'm doing it. And I sort of thought maybe I had done well in the shoot, but I wasn't sure. When they were giving me notes on my performance, they said, oh, you look so great. You look so great on camera, but that positioning is not good. You look really like you're all scrunched up. And Jessie, the director, was like, in her defense, we actually positioned her. It was a really tight shot. And so we put her like that and we told her not to move. And Tyra was sort of like, oh, well, you still have to make any position look good. She should look better. And I was like, okay, I'll take that. But, I see what happened there is they thought they had this really valid criticism, and then it sort of fell apart. But, and then again, they commented on my weight, and Nigel said, you look very uncomfortable. You look like you don't like what you're wearing. And you actually just like, you just grimaced when you saw it. And I remember being like, oh, that wasn't a grimace. Like I saw myself and I went, because I looked kind of badass. And I actually did have a genuine moment of surprise at myself, like seeing myself on camera. Because this was also, I think, one of the first times that I'd seen myself in video. You know, it wasn't still photos. And so it was kind of exciting. And I put my hand to my mouth because I was like, oh, and I guess he thought, or he was trying to make it seem like that was me being uncomfortable with my body. And I tried to correct him and they kind of wouldn't let me. And I sort of said, okay. And then the thing that I remember that did not make it to air is Twiggy said, well, I can understand why you would be uncomfortable in that outfit. You look kind of like a ham, like a cooked ham. And and then Miss J said something that was like still sort of roasting me, but also gently kind of pushing back against what Twiggy said. I think they said something like, I don't know, that's a ham. I think a lot of people would like to take a bite out of, or like something, you know, that's like, or something where I was like, oh, that seems actually very kind, you know, like I was then very uncomfortable because this woman had just called me a ham. And then they started talking about how I'd lost weight. And I remember asking, like, should I try to gain weight? Because this keeps coming up. Should I try to put on weight? Because I'm not trying to lose weight. And I happen to know because I weigh myself obsessively that I actually really have not lost much weight. I've lost 3 pounds, which when you're 5'11 really does not make much of a difference. And I gain and lose that much every month hormonally. So I have to assume like that maybe you want me to be bigger. Do you want me to gain weight? And no one would say yes. No one would look at me. No one would answer me. And so there was just this incredibly awkward silence. And then they just sent me to the back. And, and I remember thinking, like, man, like, what do they want me to do? I hope I made it clear that I'll do it, you know? Like, I would have. My eating disordered ass in that moment would have gained weight, which for me to try to do was anathema to everything that was inside of me and all of my inner monologue. But I would have done it at that point. But I think they had this idea of a narrative that I was losing weight because I was insecure and they were so attached to it, but they still couldn't bring themselves to tell a girl to gain weight because that's just not something that you do on a show about modeling. So it was like this very exemplary moment